sumx function. So what is sum function? The sum function will count the, or say it will summarize the total values in a column. Okay, using sum function you can summarize the total values, the total for as any specific column. Okay, so what we will do is we'll create another measure. I just go here, click on it, new measure, total sales. I'm going to create a measure called total sales. It's a measure. Okay, here what I'm going to do is sales amount. Let me do one thing, sum of. So when you type this sum function, automatically it shows the syntax here, column name. You need to specify the column name. Here I'm going to say fact sales, and here I'm going to say inside the parenthesis, if you scroll down, you will find the sales amount. We'll take sales amount, sum of sales amount. Yes. So this measure got created, total sales sum got created, and I'm going to see the value using a chord and you can just drag and drop this one here. So guys, don't think we have to use chord to view the values computed by measure. You can use table also. So this is your table visual. If you click on it, the table will get, empty table will get created, and if you drag and drop it here, you can see the total sales here also. Okay, but here it is kind of rounded off, but here you can format it. Go to the format icon and you can format it. So you can use any visual, but usually the chord visual is more than sufficient to display a single value, total sales. Now using sum function we are able to compute the total sales, right? So the sum function is every value in a single column, it aggregates the value, right? It finds out the total sales. And next one is sumx function. The syntax for the sumx function is, the sum function syntax is very much simple. So here sum of column name, you need to specify, and for sumx, since this function ends with x, we call it an iterating function. The sumx function, it simply iterates through a table specified in the first parameter, one row at a time. You need to remember this. Okay, in the case of sumx, the first argument is supposed to be table, don't forget this, and the next argument is expression. That's it. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the sumx function. The sumx function, what it does is it will iterate through a table. Here there is a spelling is through. Okay, it's a through, it's not thorough. Through a table, one row at a time, and perform the calculations based on the formula that you used. It does the calculations. So we will create a measure by the name of sumx. For sumx we'll create a new measure. So I'm going to click on this one, the measures table, new measure. Now we will take a look at the expression. Okay, I'm not going to specify the column name as an expression. In the case of average, I have used the column name itself as an expression. We will try it out something different here. Sumx, just for our understanding, sumx sales amount is equivalent to sumx function. The first argument is supposed to be table name, fact sales, comma, what is the expression? I can say the fact sales of okay, let me do one thing, sales of the sales amount. I can do this one also. We will do this one also now. I'm going to do this. Sumx sales amount. And we will compare and contrast the difference between the normal sum function and Sumx function with this example. We will see, are there any difference between these two? You need to remember these things very much. The interview, they will ask you what is the difference between Sumx and sum function. Look here, even the Sumx function, the value, the total sales amount computed by Sumx function and sum function, both of them are same. Then why the hell should I use Sumx function? We will create another measure to answer to this question. Similarly, you can use max x, min x, right? So the advantage of Sumx function is you can sales amount with expression. Okay, instead of specifying column name here, what I am going to do is I am going to say something like we have something called quantity, right? So fact sales quantity into sales amount. Do we have price here? Yes, we have something called cost price or list price. Yes, list price. So here I am using an expression instead of specifying the column name which we want to compute the total, right? So instead of using the column name, so in this case we have specified fact sales amount. Only when you multiply the list price by quantity, you will get the sales amount. But in this case, what we have done, we have used this expression as it is. So what it does is, it computes or it evaluates the expression and it performs the calculation for each and every row, and then it applies the sum on it. The Sumx function, it iterates through one row at a time. Each and every row it goes and takes the product of these two columns, and then similarly it goes to first row, it does the product of these two, second row it goes and then it does all the things, and finally it does the sum. The Sumx function iterates through a table, okay, one row at a time, and complete the calculation specified in the second parameter. Okay, so in this case it evaluates the expression. Okay, it iterates through a table and it evaluates this expression for each and every row, which means it computes or takes the product of these two columns for each and every row, and then we will see. So both of them are the list price. I think it is different. It will not match exactly with this. I put some sample data here. Let us see if this one match with this, and I'm going to create another sales amount Sumx with expression. Yes, yeah, same, all the three values are list price. By taking the product list price with quantity, you will get the sales amount. Okay, but since in this table already we have the sales amount column readily available, we don't have to multiply or take the product of list price by quantity. But in real time scenario, you will not have the sales amount also. You will have the list price and quantity, discount, those columns will be there. You will not get that one. So in that kind of situations, you need to do this. Look here, this card got highlighted. The corresponding measure also got highlighted with the tick mark, and if you click on this, you can see the logic that you have used it. Sumx function I used it. The first argument is table, second argument is an expression. That's what I mentioned here. Table is the first argument, second argument is an expression. So row by row it will iterate, and for each row it computes, it takes the product of these two columns and it does the aggregation. Once it does once it evaluates the expression for the entire table, right, row by row, it does the sum here. So all these three values are same here. Now the question is, so in this case I just used fact sales amount. In this case, see this is Sumx, listen very carefully, and here I have used sum here. I use sum here. Sum of fact sales amount, Sumx of, but only thing is the syntax is different. First argument is tabling, otherwise the second argument remains same as the sum function. What is the difference between sum and sum function? The interview they will ask you sum and Sumx function. The Sumx function will iterate through a table one row at a time. You need to remember this. But behind the scene what happens is both the functions are same. Sum and Sumx functions are same. Sum and Sumx functions are same. So now the question is, then why do I need Sumx function? In this case, the sum function is more than sufficient. But when, even though I have used sum function, behind the scene, what happens is the DAX engine, rewrites this function in this way. Sumx, fact tables, fact sales, comma, fact sales of sales amount. Whatever the Sumx, the function that used it here, right? The same principle, the same thing is done by the DAX or behind the scene. Though you use sum behind the scene, it uses this logic. It expands or it translates your sum function into this way. Simply translate your sum function like this. If you give sum of sales amount, behind the scene it translates this as Sumx fact sales, comma, something like that. Behind the scene it does this on your behalf. Without your knowledge, behind the scene it is doing this, like this. So then why sum function is used? When sum function can get translated like this behind the scene, why sum function? This sum function is just a syntax sugar. Syntax sugar. So what do you mean by syntax sugar? So we don't want to, we don't want to burden our developer by knowing all the syntax. If there is no sum function, you have to write it like this, isn't it? So first argument is table name, second argument is your column name. It's a painful thing. Instead, I simply allow my user to type sum function, specify sales amount, that's it. Behind the scene, the DAX engine will translate like this. Because of syntax sugar, they have introduced sum function. Both sum function, Sumx function is same, but in the case of evaluating any complex logic, or if you want to perform any calculation based on more than one column, or if you want to use any formula or business logic while performing the total sales, then Sumx is very much helpful in that kind of scenario. Like I've shown you here, taking the product of quantity into sales for each and every row, and then finally you do the sum on all those things. In that kind of situation, Sumx function. See, in this case, taking the product of two columns, right? So in the expression, you can specify different logic, different rules. The same thing is applicable with minx function, maxx function. Average x we have already seen, right? So even in the case of average x, you can do the same thing. You can specify some expression and then you can do it. So in the case of this one, right, fact sales table, first the table is scanned in the case of Sumx function. For every row in that virtual table, right, the expression is evaluated. Okay. So in that case, what happens is a row context is created by the iterator. Don't worry about row context. We'll explain you little later. So after the expression have been evaluated for each row, the rows are aggregated according to what the iterator says. So the process Sumx, right, to explain it in detail, how it works behind the scene. The Sumx function, in the case of when you use Sumx function, first the table. So in this case, fact sales, right? Fact sales is scanned. It will scan the table, and then what it does is, sorry, not for first, yeah, and then for every row, okay. So in this, see, scanning, while scanning it, it will create the virtual table. Okay, in this virtual table, this virtual table fact sales, the expression is evaluated, and then what happens is, after the expression has been evaluated, for each row the rows are aggregated. I'll write that also. After the expression, the rows are aggregated, right? So in this case we have used Sumx, hence it takes the product of quantity into sales for each and every table, each and every row of the virtual table, and then once the expression is evaluated for each row, that means the calculation is performed for each row, the rows are finally aggregated using sum function. It does the total. Sum function will give you total, right? So these are the three steps you need to remember. So in the case of Sumx function, this is what is happening. The same thing is applicable in min-x function, average x function, the max x function. Got it? So that is that is what is happening here. Next we will look here. So we have covered so far the sum and Sumx function, average x, and average a function, and we understood the difference between each and every function. Just give me a second. I have a visitor. I'll just say bye to him and I'll come back.